the true story of the 1963 Great Train Robbery. It's late, and the night gently spreads its cloak over the world. Everything becomes quieter, more mysterious. It's the perfect time for a story. Not just any story, though. A true tale tinged with bravery, mystery, and a touch of madness. Tonight, I will take you to 1960s England, into the heart of a night that forever altered the course of criminal history. Imagine a train, solitary, gliding on its rails like a silent shadow. It's not a passenger train, but a mail train. It carries sacks filled with used banknotes, destined for the vaults of the Bank of England. But that night, the train was awaited not by postmen or bankers, but by men. 15 men, to be exact. Bruce Reynolds, the leader of the group, was a complex man. As a child, he grew up in London's modest streets where elegance and resourcefulness went hand in hand. His father, a railway worker, spent hours explaining to him how trains operated. "Bruce, my boy," he would say while adjusting his uniform, "trains are the lifeblood of this country." These words stayed with young Bruce. But life was not kind. At 15, he lost his parents in a tragic accident and was left to fend for himself. He developed an extraordinary ability to observe people and understand their weaknesses. "That's when I learned," he would often say, "there's no lock without a key." Roy James had a different story. The only son of a race mechanic, he spent his childhood in garages, surrounded by grease and roaring engines. At 16, he won his first amateur race. His dream of becoming a professional driver was shattered by an accident. That broken dream led him down darker paths. Ronald Buster Edwards was a simple, almost gentle man. As a child, he helped his father in their modest grocery store. But persistent poverty scarred his soul. When he married, he vowed to give his family what he never had. But legal means seemed insufficient. Finally, there was Ronnie Biggs, a mischievous kid from a poor neighborhood. From a young age, he had a natural talent for persuasion. With his sly smile and innate sense of performance, he could convince anyone of anything. He was a dreamer, but also a man ready to do anything to escape a life he found stifling. It all began on a rainy evening in a smoky London pub. Bruce Reynolds, surrounded by a few trusted men, outlined the broad strokes of his idea. "Gentlemen," he began, his grave tone drawing their attention, "you know this mail train carries millions. Every night. Without real protection. It runs in the shadows, as if it were invisible." Roy, sitting at the back of the room, raised an eyebrow. "Invisible, maybe. But not untouchable," he said with a smirk. "Exactly," Bruce replied, leaning on the table. "What we need is a perfect plan. No weapons, no unnecessary violence. Just intelligence and precision." The men around the table exchanged glances. They knew Bruce never proposed ideas lightly. If he spoke of it, it meant he had already thought of everything. For months, the isolated farm they had chosen became the operations nerve center. Bruce spent hours examining railway maps. Every detail had to be perfect. Roy tested various escape routes. If we turn here, we can avoid the main roads, he explained, drawing lines on a map. Buster, often silent, prepared the logistics. He ensured all the equipment was in place: flashlights, gloves, tools for opening the train doors. Ronnie, meanwhile, often joked to lighten the mood. "Hey, guys, do you think we can ask for a Christmas bonus after this?" he would say, provoking bursts of laughter. But behind those moments of camaraderie, everyone felt the pressure. Bruce, especially, struggled to sleep. He spent long nights pacing around the farm, his gaze lost. He knew that the slightest misstep could ruin everything. On August 8th, 1963, everything was ready. Silence reigned around the farm. The men, dressed in black, adjusted their gloves. Bruce cast one last glance at his watch. "It's time," he said calmly. They all nodded. Roy started the truck, the engine's growl echoing in the night. The drive to the meeting point was marked by nervous silence. Only Bruce's murmurs, repeating instructions, disturbed the atmosphere. When the train appeared in the distance, hearts raced. The modified red signal glowed faintly, like an invitation to stop. Everything happened very quickly. The train slowed down and then came to a halt. The men emerged from the shadows, coordinated like a well-oiled machine. Jack Mills, the train's driver, opened the cabin door to check why the train had stopped. He squinted into the darkness, looking for an explanation for the unexpected red signal. That's when he saw them, silhouettes approaching quickly, their flashlights pointing at him. "What are you doing here?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the cold air. Before he could react further, two men were on him. Jack tried to resist, but was quickly overpowered. Buster, despite his imposing build, tried to reassure him. "Don't panic, Mr. Mills. We just want the money. No one will be hurt if you cooperate." Jack, stunned but conscious, understood he didn't really have a choice. Meanwhile, Roy and another group member took control of the locomotive. They diverted the train to a predetermined point where the rest of the team was waiting. The train slowed down until it stopped under an isolated bridge. There, the rest of the group rushed to the mail cars. The doors were opened with impressive precision, the tools lightly echoing in the night. The money sacks, heavier than they had anticipated, were quickly loaded into the truck. Ronnie Biggs, out of breath but always ready with a joke, muttered while lifting his sack, "I've never loved the smell of money this much. Smells like freedom." Bruce, supervising the operation, checked his watch. Every second counted. They had planned the heist to last less than 30 minutes, and so far, everything was going according to plan. But deep down, Bruce felt a strange apprehension. He knew that in any plan, no matter how perfect, there was always an element of the unpredictable. When the truck was fully loaded, the men disappeared into the night, leaving behind an empty and silent train. The road back to the farm was long, but Roy knew every turn, every back road. The drive was smooth, almost eerily calm, and the adrenaline in the truck made the atmosphere electric. "How much, do you think?" Ronnie asked, breaking the silence. Bruce answered without taking his eyes off the road. "Millions. But don't worry about the exact number, Ronnie. Focus on what we need to do next." Ronnie shrugged, a nervous smile on his lips. "And what do we do next? Open a bar in the Bahamas?" Laughter broke out, but everyone knew things were about to get more complicated. Once back at the farm, they began counting their haul. The stacks of money seemed endless, piling nearly to the ceiling. The mood was euphoric, but Bruce, ever cautious, reminded everyone of the importance of staying calm. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of excitement. "What we did tonight is historic. But that means we are now the most wanted men in England. No mistakes, no foolishness. We remain invisible." The discovery of the abandoned train triggered a media storm. Scotland Yard launched an unprecedented manhunt. The investigators were methodical, analyzing every clue left behind. At the farm, despite their precautions, the robbers had left fingerprints, papers, and other traces. The team, although cautious, began to feel the pressure. Ronnie Biggs, in particular, seemed more nervous than usual. "Bruce, we should leave. Now. Leave all this behind," he said one evening while the others were quietly talking in another room. Bruce placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Ronnie, listen to me. Everything will be fine as long as we stick together. As long as we stay discreet. But if you want to leave, it's your choice. Just know you won't be able to come back." Ronnie nodded silently, but his eyes betrayed his worry. The silence in the room grew heavy and oppressive. Bruce knew keeping the group united was becoming increasingly difficult. Each day at the farm amplified the paranoia and stress. The men were on edge, each battling their own fears and doubts. Yet Bruce had to remain their pillar. If he faltered, everything would collapse. The next day, a seemingly trivial event set things ablaze. While recounting the sacks, Charlie Wilson, always meticulous, announced a problem. "At least 5 sacks are missing," he said flatly, but the impact was immediate. All eyes met. Ronnie was the first to react. "Maybe we left them on the train? With all the stress, it's possible." "Impossible," Roy replied sharply. "I checked every car. Everything we could take, we took." "Or someone took them," Charlie murmured, his eyes fixed on the stacks in front of him. That single phrase was enough to sow chaos. Veiled accusations, whispered suspicions, everything erupted into a cacophony. Bruce intervened immediately. "No paranoia," he commanded firmly. "We're all in the same boat. We'll resolve this calmly. But first, we need to focus on security." Despite his efforts to calm the tensions, Bruce knew the group was fractured. Each man lived in nervous anticipation of a police raid. Ronnie, unable to contain his agitation, suggested going into town for supplies. "No one will recognize me," he insisted. Bruce hesitated but eventually relented. "Be careful," he told him. "No unnecessary conversations. And don't carry any bills on you." Ronnie left, but his prolonged absence quickly worried the others. When he returned, he looked agitated, as if he'd seen a ghost. "There were police in the village," he said, breathing heavily. "They were asking questions. I think they know something." This news put everyone on edge. Bruce clenched his teeth. Ronnie's reckless outing might have compromised their hideout. Meanwhile, Scotland Yard was intensifying its efforts. Jack Slipper, the detective in charge, was known for his persistence. He analyzed every clue found on the abandoned train. A fingerprint on a lever. A suspicious mud stain on a boot. Even crumbs of food left behind. Every detail was a piece of the puzzle. During a press conference, Slipper sent a direct message to the robbers. "To you, gentlemen who orchestrated this robbery, we know who you are. And I guarantee one thing, it's only a matter of time before we knock on your door." These words, echoed in the newspapers, reached the farm like a shockwave. Charlie Wilson, usually so calm, gritted his teeth as he read the article. "They're toying with us," he murmured, tossing the paper onto the table. "They want us to lose our nerve." Bruce nodded. "And that's why we need to be smarter than them. No sudden moves. No stupid decisions. We stay invisible." Despite this, Bruce knew they couldn't stay forever. The first departures were organized. Roy James left the farm first, taking a discreet car to a trusted contact. "If anyone can disappear without a trace, it's you, Roy," Bruce told him, shaking his hand before his departure. Ronnie, however, dreamed of escaping abroad. Brazil, he would often say, a dreamy gleam in his eyes. "They'll never look for me there." But even in their flight, mistakes were made. At the farm, police found fingerprints, scribbled notes, and even marks on teacups. These clues were enough to link the gang to the heist. Arrests began, one after another. Charlie Wilson was the first to fall. During his interrogation, he remained silent, responding to police with cold stares. But constant pressure, combined with the mounting evidence, eventually broke several members of the group. Bruce Reynolds was captured after 5 years on the run. His capture was almost elegant. "You took your time," he told the police as he held out his wrists. Ronnie Biggs, however, managed to escape from prison. His flight, spanning Australia and Brazil, became legendary. Yet even he couldn't escape his past forever. Each gang member took a different path after their capture, marked by the weight of their choices and actions. Bruce Reynolds, considered the mastermind, was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Behind the walls of his cell, he spent hours reflecting on every detail of the robbery. He often wrote the same phrase in his notebook: "It was perfect until it wasn't." Bruce accepted his fate with dignity, but one question haunted him: was it the glory or the money that had driven him? In his memoirs, written years later, he confessed, "I wanted to be immortal. I wanted history to remember us." And it did, but at what cost? Ronnie Biggs, after his spectacular escape, built a life on the run. He lived in Brazil, where he became a local celebrity. The press loved his mischievous spirit and his ability to turn his crime into a legend. But behind the smiles and interviews, Ronnie felt a deep loneliness. Sitting on a beach in Rio, he once confided to a friend, "I'm free, but I'm a prisoner of my own story. Every look, every question takes me back to that night. It's as if I'm no longer myself, but just the guy from the heist." Despite this, he embraced life to the fullest, living by a simple philosophy: if you can't escape your past, make it a show. Buster Edwards chose a different path. After fleeing to Mexico, he decided to return to England to face justice. During his trial, he declared, "I'm not a bad man. I did a bad thing for a good reason. I wanted to give my family a better life." After serving his sentence, Buster opened a small flower shop in London. Every morning, he carefully arranged bouquets, finding a kind of redemption in his work. Yet even in this peaceful life, the memory of the heist lingered. One day, as he placed a rose in a vase, he murmured, "Sometimes I wonder if I should have stayed in Mexico. But here, at least, I can look people in the eye." Roy James, the gang's driver, was also arrested and imprisoned. During his years in detention, he returned to his first love, drawing. He sketched racing cars, dreaming of what his life could have been if he hadn't followed Bruce into this mad adventure. One day, a guard observed him at work and asked, "Why do you always draw cars?" Roy replied with a sad smile, "Because they don't betray you. They go where you drive them, no questions asked." After his release, he attempted to re-enter the world of motorsports, but the shadow of the heist followed him wherever he went. The other gang members experienced varied fates. Some reintegrated into society after their release, while others disappeared into anonymity, unable to overcome the weight of their past. Yet an invisible bond united them all. Even years later, when their names reappeared in the news, the world remembered them as a team, a collective legend. And then there were the darker reflections. In his later years, Bruce often wondered what he could have achieved if he had used his talents differently. What if I had been a businessman? What if I had built something instead of stealing it? These thoughts haunted him, yet he also felt a strange pride in what they had accomplished. We challenged a system. We showed that daring and ingenuity can rival power. Ronnie, on the other hand, expressed little regret. "If I could do it again, I'd do it without hesitation," he often said, a glass of cachaca in hand. But in moments of solitude, he wrote letters to his son, revealing a more vulnerable side. "My boy, I don't want you to be like me. Find your own path. And remember, easy money never leads to a happy ending." Buster found a kind of peace in his simple life as a florist. But every time he heard a train whistle in the distance, he would close his eyes and relive that night, the stars, the sound of the rails, the mix of excitement and fear. It all came back, like an old song he knew by heart. Years passed, but the story of the Great Train Robbery continued to fascinate. Books, films, and documentaries turned it into a legend. Yet for the men who lived it, it was far more than that. It was a blend of triumph and tragedy, a moment frozen in time where everything seemed possible until it all fell apart. And perhaps somewhere in the English countryside, under a tree or within a forgotten wall, the missing millions still sleep. But that mystery, like the men who created it, now belongs to history. So, dear listener, let these thoughts accompany you into your dreams. Perhaps you'll see Bruce, Roy, Ronnie, and Buster not as criminals, but as men, flawed yet daring. Good night.